Welcome to It's Not What You Think with Mordy Levine, where we get to meet and talk to spiritual teachers from around the world. Our guests are from all walks of life, and we hear about how they got into spirituality and how they navigate the world we all live in. This is episode 7, recorded on April 16th, 2021. My guest today is Al Zolynas. Al began Zen training at the Zen Center of Los Angeles in 1979, became a student of Charlotte Joko Beck, and worked with her closely in LA and then later in San Diego until she left in 2006. Al is recognized as a Zen teacher by the White Plum Asanga and the Ordinary Mind Zen School. We talked about his experience studying with Zen Master Joko Beck and some of the life-changing practices she left with us, and what it was like to learn from a true Zen master. And of course, we talked about one of my favorite topics, preparation for death, from a Zen perspective and also a Tibetan Buddhist perspective. Al can be reached through his website, freewayzen.org, and It's Not What You Think podcast is available on all streaming platforms, so please like, comment, or share or subscribe on your favorite platform. That support is enough to continue to allow us to produce this show. Our interviews are with people who may have opinions different from yours or mine, so while we keep an open mind, just remember, it's not what you think. Al Zolynas began Zen training at the Zen Center of Los Angeles in 1979, became a student of Charlotte Joko Beck and worked with her closely in LA, later in San Diego until she left in 2006. Al is recognized as a Zen teacher by the White Plum Asanga and the Ordinary Mind Zen School. He's a professor of English and writing for only 42 years. Couldn't make it to 50, huh? At universities throughout the country. Al continues to write and publish poetry. He has written several actually beautiful books that you can find on Amazon, if you've ever heard of them, such as his most recent book, Near and Far. One reviewer wrote, Al Zolynas' poems show a reverence, sometimes somewhat whimsical, for ordinary life moments, be it a nostalgic look at the past or an appreciation for the simplicity of life around us. Another reviewer wrote, Al's poems are personal, rich in emotion, and often leavened with humor. Many capture the beauty and mystery of everyday life, so highly recommend them. Al can be reached through his website, freewayzen.org. So, welcome. That was long. I did all that in one breath, by the way, that whole intro. I don't know if you noticed that.
Very impressive.
So, welcome, Al, to It's Not What You Think. How was your week?
Good, thank you. Did you say how my week was?
Yeah, how was your week? Another week in the pandemic. Pandemic, by the way, goes on forever. They say it's going to stop. I don't believe that anymore.
Yeah. We've had my wife and I have had both our shots, and we're feeling cautiously optimistic. We actually had a brunch in somebody's backyard with other old farts who had also had both of their COVID shots. So that was a little bit of a break from the last year. And, I remain optimistic, although cautiously so, I guess. I'm sure you do too.
Yeah. We had a similar situation for the first time in, I guess, 15 months or a year. We went outdoors to eat with other people that had been vaccinated. And even though, they say, yeah, no problem, it's like, you're like, okay, you tiptoe gently and all that. So, absolutely. So I met you a few years ago and was very happy attending your classes in Escondido, California for about a year. So thank you for that. So do you remember the very first time you tried to meditate or started going down a spiritual path, and what motivated, what suckered you into that path?
Yeah, let me go all the way back if you could
this lifetime
a little bit of story.
We're going to keep it to this lifetime though. Okay.
That's right. Yeah. So as far back as I remember, I've always been a kind of an inward gazing creature, so that even when I was a young boy, I would lie on my bed at night and before falling asleep. And I would have quote unquote strange experiences. They seemed strange to me, so I didn't share them with anybody, but it was just sort of like something that grew out of just lying there perfectly still. For some reason, that was something that I wanted to do and did do. And I would simply lie very still on my back in my bed in the darkness And, I would have various odd experiences, things like feeling like I was disappearing or getting very small, alternately feeling like I was expanding. Um, just just these odd little kinds of experiences that I intuited were maybe not so usual. So I didn't share them with people, but I persistently had experiences like that, or sometimes just feeling like everything had disappeared and there was nothing but vast, luminous, black space. And it was very calming and reassuring, and I felt fine about it, and it felt good. Um, then I also had an odd experience in my father's tool shed in the backyard where he kept wheat for the chickens, a big sack of wheat. And it was my job to, scoop out some grain and take it to the chickens and feed them periodically. But I was in the habit of, once I went in there and I was sitting on the sack of wheat, and a little mouse came out, and I just remained very still and just watched the mouse, and eventually kind of nosed his way up, and the sack was open in a place, and he picked up a little grain of wheat and then went off. And then pretty soon I kept staying still, and pretty soon another mouse came, and then another. Pretty soon there were these mice, maybe 5, 6, 7 more mice coming in. And all this while I was just really still because I didn't want to scare them away. And at one point they actually, crawled over my legs to get to the wheat. And that was just really special and cute. But all this time I was being very, very, very still, not consciously meditating because I didn't know what that was. But at one point, the sort of the light that was coming in through the gaps in the wooden walls, just lit up all of the little dusts of mote dusts that were floating in the. And there too, in that moment, everything kind of just sort of became absolutely, I don't know what word to even use. And this, of course, is memory. So 65 years ago. So it was just splendid. It was just splendid.
Yeah, the world stopped.
Yeah, the world stopped, and it kept moving as it stopped.
Yeah, well, the world, your mind stopped, whatever.
Right.
However we want to describe it, the words are weak compared to the experience.
They are, right. But subsequently, I wrote about that in a poem, and I wrote about other things that are related to that. And I always felt like my quote unquote Zen experience was something that I could explore further, at least with words further, with poetry. But as far as like official first time adult meditation experience in a tradition, I would have to make that be somewhere around 1979 or so, after I was exploring some Buddhist possibilities with a friend of mine. We would go to different centers and try their meditation out.
And did you rate them like 5 stars, 4 stars, things like that?
Yeah, between ourselves as we drove back and forth from LA, let's say, or somewhere else that we had found a center. And my friend was also a poet and an inveterate and beautiful talker. So we had terrific conversations on the way up and on the way back from some of these places. And then I remember one place we visited, it was a little Buddhist center, not the LA Zen Center, but a little place just on a Saturday. And there was a monk there, and he was dressed in robes. And he had instructed us in sitting and everything. And afterwards, he offered us some tea. I believe it might have been green tea. And we sat around drinking green tea for a little bit. And at one point, he dropped the cup and it shattered on the kitchen floor.
Intentionally or?
No, I think he just did it. It just was an accident. And It might have been intentional, but I doubt it. He just let it slipped out of his hand. He dropped it, and he just said impermanence. And at the time, that really impressed me because, well, I was new to the whole game, and nobody had said anything like that before. I didn't know about the Buddhist terminology. I didn't know about impermanence particularly, and that just it just made a lasting impression somehow.
Right. Now, everyone would say that word.
Yeah, everybody would say that, right? There'd be a YouTube about it.
Yeah, you can't throw a rock without hitting a Buddhist. So
Yeah.
yeah, so you drove around California, as I recall, looking for spirituality, and then you hit upon at some point you hit upon Mizumi Roshi's Zen Center in L.A.
That's right.
And how did you determine that I'm home, or oh, this is the place for me, or did you not really know that at the time?
I didn't really know it at the time. I was still very much in exploring mode, but I eventually went to a couple of all-day sittings, and they were a little bit grueling because you basically sat for half an hour with just a little short break in between, and you did that from the time you got there at whatever ungodly hour it was, 6:30, and until it was done at 7 or 8 at night. Um, but something kind of kept drawing me back, and I don't know what it was exactly. Wasn't necessarily Mizumi himself, although I did get a chance to see him in what they call dokusan, one-on-one.
The interview. Yeah.
And he was very nice and very non-threatening. I hadn't started any kind of koan study, so it wasn't one of these, no, get out.
With the
It was
stick.
just, yeah, what do you do? Oh, you're an academic. You like poetry? Oh, yeah, I like poetry too. Nice to meet you. But then when I went back up there soon after that and stayed for an entire, I think it was a 3-day sesshin, a 3-day retreat, I was immediately assigned to Joko, and something about her got me.
Gotcha. You got hooked.
And
Right.
it was something. It was something about her simple presence, her being, and that sense of that she was nothing but this ordinary older lady, but she had something behind her eyes that was immediately recognizable, and I kind of said, I want that.
Got it. Yeah. Okay, good. I'd love to talk about Joko. I do want to go back for a moment, though, to your
Sure.
earlier experiences, because I've heard people, friends, colleagues, whatever, that have had similar experiences growing up as a child. They
Sure.
sensed this, they felt that, they didn't tell anyone. And and when I look at that, there's a sense from my perspective of, oh, I didn't have any of that. I wish I had that.
Mm.
The way I bumped into Zen, if there is such a thing, is I was in graduate school and I was unhappy in life. I didn't know it at the time. I was in a box of, my own. And I bumped into a guy who said, hey, I teach a karate class and it's free. Do you want to try it? I
Mm.
said, sure, I'll try it. I was from Brooklyn. I wasn't scared of anything, and I didn't know it. And I tried it, and, we sat on our knees on this hardwood floor for like a
Mm.
couple of minutes before class. And then I was about 10 minutes into whatever, hour and a half, 2 hour class, and I was dying. And
Mm.
I was like, never going to make it through this. I am not coming back. I'm going to finish this. Not. And at the end of class, we sat on our knees again, and there was no instruction for meditation. It was just, he made said a command in Japanese. It was a very traditional oriented Japanese karate. Now, here's what hooked me was when we were done with class, I didn't have a worry, a care in the world. The mind stopped.
Right.
And I couldn't have described it at that time. I only knew that I felt good without any drugs. And as I said, I'm going to come back. And I had the same experience 10 or 15 minutes into the class. I'm like, this is crazy. These people are crazy, whatever. And then, but then when we were all done, because, a lot of these arts are meditation in motion.
Sure.
You don't have time to be thinking about what am I going to do for lunch, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how I got hooked because I was, I guess, so severely unhappy, and this kind of cleared the dust,
Mm,
at least temporarily.
right.
Um, but so when I look at experiences that you have, I feel like, wow, you actually, I don't want to say the word new, but had an understanding of some kind early on. Your being, your consciousness from previous lives, whatever it is, that you were able to, lock into something or touch that world.
Yeah, and I can't explain it either. I mean, I didn't none of that, none of those stories that I just recounted to you were um, present in my mind when I started exploring Zen more formally. I didn't, go back and say to myself, "Oh, I remember what I was like on the sack of wheat," and
Right.
all of that. That just wasn't there. And I definitely relate to your experience of discomfort in the legs and the knees. That,
Right.
but in Zen, they tell you that that's what's going to happen, and it's always reassuring to be simply told by somebody who's been there that here's what you're going to do, and here's probably what you're going to feel like, and you know what? That's completely normal. If you really are in a lot of pain, then by all means, move and adjust your position. But if you can, hold the position for the duration. So that was very helpful. Just that notion of being reassured. Uh,
Right.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I didn't have any big experiences once I started formally sitting Zen for quite a while, and in the Zen tradition, they really kind of poo-poo you even talking about
Right.
those
Right.
big experiences. But once in a while, you can bring them up, and especially you can bring them up with your teacher, because you need to be warned about whether this is just some big illusion that you've fallen into, some delusion, some vision, something that is really irrelevant. Zen uses the term makio, all the imagery that the mind releases as it's quieting down. And sometimes that imagery can be quite dramatic and quite entertaining, and very seductive also.
Mm.
So those are not considered to be, really relevant, other than they're indications that things might be quieting down and
Cleaning house.
quieting down.
We're
Yeah,
cleaning house.
exactly.
Right.
But
So,
that feeling of being empty and cleaned out that you reference, I think that's very important, and that's a lot of what can happen in any kind of meditation practice. It doesn't have to be Zen, but the recognition of that kind of those moments of freedom over a lifetime, they start. This is just my analogy. They start to hook up. So instead of having a couple of minutes of emptiness and freedom, you have a couple more a little bit later, then they last longer, and then they occur more frequently, and then eventually, theoretically, they kind of hook up. And the old story is that the meditator gets off his or her seat and continues to meditate.
oh yeah, I
Yeah,
I can attest to that.
yeah, sure.
So, I remember when I was studying with you, you had mentioned Joko Beck a couple of times, and there was something about it that I said, well, how come I never heard of this person? And I went back home and I went online and I found, I don't know if I shared this with you, but I found the transcript.
Mm,
She apparently had a student, I want to say from Australia, that
right.
had seen her a couple of times, and then she was doing a phone call with him once a week.
Yep.
And this guy, thank goodness, had recorded with her knowledge their discussions, and he transcribed it and put it out, onto the ether, and I found it, and this is not what I do. I don't. I'm not big on podcasts. I don't read blogs. I don't do any of that stuff. If I want to read a book, I'd rather have the book in my hand, the transcript. And these were, I don't know, 50, 100, 200 pages long. And I started reading it. And what she had to offer this guy, me and this guy and whoever's reading it, just blew me away.
Yeah.
And then, and there was one. So actually, I wanted to talk about there was one exercise or task that she gave this guy about 3 lists of requirements.
Hmm.
Do you want, and that had a huge impact on my life, still
Yeah.
does. Probably not a day goes by that I don't think about that. Do you want to describe what that task was?
Sure, absolutely. I use that to great effect on myself as well, and I return to it periodically because the items on the list might change, but and I've used it with the group at Freeways End periodically as
Yeah.
well. Um, yes, and I saw that same transcribed phone conversation, and I've recommended it to people over the years. Um, yeah, so she basically, it's a list of what she calls requirements. So, and it's in 3 parts. And the first part is write down all of the requirements that were expected of you as you were growing up. These are anything that the adults in your life, teachers, parents especially, uh, expected of you, and they required you to be. So you would and she asked you to write it down in the first person using how you've internalized it. So I must be neat, let's say, is one of your
Mhm.
requirements. So you write that down. Another one, I must be kind to strangers. You write that down. I must I must always be a good boy, let's say. Whatever way you remember it. And you write down this list, and it could be a list of anywhere from 12 to 20 to 25 discrete, particular items that were required of you as you were growing up. Then the next list becomes a little more interesting, and that is, what of that first list do you still have on board internally as something that you believe in strongly? So, do you still say to yourself, I must be a good boy? And furthermore, if you do, what does that mean exactly? What does it mean for you to be a good boy? Um, and then you compare the old list to the new list you're making, and some things will have fallen away. Uh, well, you must clean up your room. Well, I don't have to clean up my room anymore, so that's not on the second list, let's say. Um, anyway, you start to you winnow out the items, and you get down to some real requirements that are strong in your life even today. And then the third list is to just sort of see in a very visceral way how trying to fulfill those requirements has their effect on you. In other words, what does it mean like? What does it mean to you, or how does it show up in your life that you have to be, let's say you still have on board, I have to be neat. So, okay, so in the presence of anyone who is not neat, you feel a judgment surface. Oh, why doesn't that person take care of their clothes? Why doesn't that person clean out their car periodically? Judgment, judgment, judgment. And without having examined this as your own given requirement and then still holding on to requirement, let's say, you don't really have any distance from it. So now you maybe have a little distance. Oh, every time I see somebody or something that's not neat, a big judgment pops up. Well, you've already, as a practitioner, may have come across judgment and the necessity to see it clearly and to not so much expunge it,
Hmm.
but just to
Hmm.
see it clearly and then get some freedom around that. So that third list is very important, and it's usually a shorter list, but nonetheless, it's where all the gritty stuff happens. So in what Joko would say, the practice with. So how do you practice with your requirement to always be neat and to have everybody else be neat?
Hmm.
Well, and what she would say is, well, the way you practice with it is you notice that anytime you're in the presence of unneatness, you feel this squirrely thing in your
Discomfort.
chest, or your back of your neck
Right.
feels hot,
Right.
and you feel that. And then you also log in any thoughts that might be swirling around that. There's usually a whole constellation of thoughts I must be neat. Well, why must you be neat? Well, because it's good to be neat. Well, why is it good to be neat? Because it means that the world is in order, and I'm in control. And oh,
Mm,
wait a minute, I got to be in control. These little insights start to pop then at
yeah.
that point.
So
Anyway,
let
it's
me
a terrific exercise for anybody who wants to give it a try.
let me give you my version of that
Sure.
because it's slightly different.
Yeah.
And the first list, absolutely. What did you pick up explicitly, implicitly? Like you said, be quiet, be a good boy, don't do that, don't steal, make your bed, whatever it was. By the way, the very first time I made my list, I only had 5 things on it.
Mm.
And I thought that's pretty good. But then like a couple of weeks went by and I noticed I have like 30 things on my list.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was kind of funny. And whenever I give that assignment out, I let people know, you'll probably start with a few, but I want you to do this over the next few weeks.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't say that, but that's true.
Right. And then the second list, my recollection is, and I could have gotten it from another source, was write down all the expectations that you have of yourself as an adult.
Hmm.
So it's similar to what you're saying, but
Yeah.
it could conflict.
Yeah. That's
When I
true.
was a child, be neat. When I'm an adult, my requirements is be free,
Hmm.
more relaxed about you don't have to be neat. Could be a requirement. So now I've got these two lists with some of it's the same, some of it can be very very different, can be absolutely in conflict with each other. And then the third list was similar to what you said, which was okay, when something goes wrong on your list from you, be on time, but then you end up being late because there was traffic on the freeway, or someone else makes you late, or they're late. How do you feel? What does it feel like?
Right.
My anger, I feel irritated, annoyed, stressed, envious, jealousy, whatever it is, feel that. So what I really loved about the whole two list thing was it's impossible. It's impossible to meet those requirements that we have of ourselves.
Right.
And and not only that, but those requirements of ourselves really, and I don't remember if she said this or this is just in my mind, really create our ego of who we think we are, who we
Sure.
believe we are. I'm a good businessman. I'm introverted. I'm a great father. That's who I believe I am. That's my ego. Those lists are my ego.
Right.
But the thing that really hit me over the head hard was when, how do you know something's been trampled on your list? Oh, just check out the next time you get annoyed, irritated, or angry. And then you say to yourself,
Exactly right.
that was her assignment. It's like, okay, next time you get irritated or annoyed or angry, say, okay, what was the requirement on the list
Right.
that, oh, it was that requirement, always be on time. I can't always be on time. Sometimes my wife is late. Sometimes I hit traffic, the dogs, da 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 da. So we set ourselves up for failure. And it's impossible to meet these requirements. And as a result, now, because I'm holding myself up these impossible conflicting requirements, now I'm going to be angry. I'm going to be annoyed. I'm going to be irritated. To me, that encapsulated the whole ball of wax.
Yeah, I'm glad you put that corrective in about the second list about asking yourself what requirements you have now as an adult. That's very important. She takes this even further in at other times she did, and that is that what this reveals is that the requirements are contradictory also. So
Right.
there's not one ego, you could say. There's about 1,900 egos, and
Right.
in one moment this ego is dominant, but in the next moment the contradictory ego comes along. But then also she dug us, or had us dig even deeper, and that is investigate. She would say something like, investigate what might be your core belief beneath all of these requirements and these expectations that you'll never be able to fulfill. As you say, you'll just die trying. But what's the core belief? And by that she meant, what's the core negative belief? What is the thing that you have bought into about yourself that you really don't want to experience? It's stuffed down low enough that for the most part, you're not going to have to confront it. You've got all this, other stuff on top of it.
Protection. Right, right,
Yeah,
right.
but practice unpeels some of that. So usually there are things like the core beliefs are not as numerous, and they're pretty easy to express. Things like I'm just not good enough. I'll never be good enough. I'm unworthy. I'm weak. Whatever. Everybody has a different flavor. And she asserted and claimed that it was useful to try to unearth that little by little. And you don't necessarily do it always directly. It sometimes comes up directly, but it's sometimes necessary to kind of circle around it. So doing these exercises with requirements and labeling your thoughts and watching your bodily sensations and stuff, all of that functions in her terms as sort of slowly unpeeling the layer, so that when that core belief in all of its horror and terror surfaces, you can actually see it and be it and allow it. And then in that, some freedom starts to show up.
So the idea there is that you see or understand the core belief after, let's say, doing these types of exercises, and then there's a recognition that it's just an illusion.
It is, but before that recognition of illusion is that the necessity to feel the horror and the pain of it. Because remember, this has been on board all your life in the way she talks about it, and it's been stuffed down for the most part, and it's had to come out indirectly. And now you've got a glimpse of it directly, and it's kind of like, oh, the horror, in that moment. And that's oftentimes all it takes, just that little moment of allowing the horror and the fear in. And then on the flip side of that is what you just said, the recognition, the insight, and the measure of freedom that comes from at least momentarily clearing that. And sometimes it's not just momentary.
Right, right. No, I can imagine. I mean, you're basically feeling and sensing some very, very deep-seated pain. And like everything we do in Buddhism, we don't just kind of like, we don't ignore it, we don't suppress it. We just have to see it and maybe even lean into it and have a better feel for it because it's there. We've just tucked it down so low that we've never had to deal with it. So just kind of feeling it, I think, is enough to, at some point, realize that it's an illusion.
Yeah.
The story I tell about that type of thing is, and I told it once before on the podcast, is there's great Tibetan Lama Tsoknyi Rinpoche was walking across a bridge, a glass bridge in China, and had a number of students with him. And he comes from a family of great lamas. And he found himself on his knees on this glass bridge. He was so fearful, fear of heights was just gripping him, panic, full-blown panic attack, couldn't move. And my understanding is he made his way out of it and, I guess crossed the bridge, and he coined a term, true but not real.
Yeah.
which is so what he's saying, what I'm feeling here is true.
Yeah.
But it's not real
Yeah.
because the bridge is safe, or whatever that inner core belief that we've had. It's true. I believe that.
Yeah.
I can feel that, but it doesn't make it real.
Yeah.
The other thing is what I find funny, and I'm glad that I find it funny, is this whole concept of conflicting expectations. I expect myself to be on time.
Right.
And if I'm 5 minutes late, that's okay.
Yeah.
But if you're 5 minutes late, that's not okay. My definition, and not only that, but that can change day to day.
Sure.
And that can change moment to moment.
Yep.
My neatness is this. Yours is not neat. You call that neat?
Yeah.
But tomorrow, my neatness might look like yours. So I just find it ridiculously hilarious, but nevertheless, that's who I think I am. That
Yeah.
at the end of the day, because if someone tramples on it, I get annoyed, I get irritated.
Yeah.
Insane.
Yeah, that's a perfect example of the the multiplicity of egos. How one time they're all designed to serve us, or what we think of as
Right.
us, but it's very convenient to allow yourself off the hook when you're late. And
Oh, sure.
yeah,
Right. It was okay for me to be to violate my my list requirement 17, but not for you. You
yeah,
know, hold you to the same. And the nerve of me to even hold you to my requirement is just it's absurd. That's why I just love that exercise.
yeah,
Is it just brings up out so much absurdity and so much really understanding about why we may feel these negative states of mind.
yeah,
Negative, you have a
yeah,
negative state of mind? I'll show you something on your list.
yeah. Exactly right. Yeah, so Joko always made the point that what we practice with is we practice with anything and everything that's in the way of our natural condition, which is free, open, aware, joyful. All of that's just the way we're designed to be, but because of years and years of conditioning, we've smeared that over, and so we got to unsmear it, and that's the practice.
Yeah. So I've seen at least one documentary about Joko. I've read several of her books, outstanding, and but just from a personal perspective, what else can you share? Oh, this is how she was, or this is her, how she, is there any story that you had or moment of inspiration or de-inspiration or that really highlights, who she was to give us a flavor?
Yeah, I would say that the things I remember are either her in front of the group talking. Oftentimes, extemporaneously, she would say something like, "Well, I didn't feel like preparing a talk today," and she would just own it. But I'll either entertain your questions, or I have this one thought or this one sentence, and let me share that with you. And then that's all it would take, because then she would take off from there. So she was. What I loved about her is her spontaneity, her flexibility, her willingness to just engage in the moment and not necessarily come all prepared. And the other way I remember her a lot is just one-on-one in interview in Daesan, and she was depending on and this is projection on the student's part, I'm sure. Depending on where I was, I would see a particular kind of Joko. So if I were, clutched around something that I didn't want to let go of, or I was ashamed of something, or I felt inadequate in some way, I would project back this fierce warrior who was just about to, call me on my deepest shit. And she would look like this fierce entity. But oftentimes, if I went in there and I was just calm and spontaneous, and had a question or didn't have a question, she was just this kind, grandmotherly woman who was just present and alert, and always happy. There was nothing about her that she didn't seem to get. She didn't go off the rails.
Right. Now, she came to, my understanding is she came to Buddhism relatively late in life, not as a child, but, and, and from what I've read, they call her Master Joko Beck. To me, master really means something more than just she's pretty good at it. She's
Right?
assuming that that title's appropriate. So I just assume she put in all the time and all the, with Maizumi Roshi or, various, people along the way to get to that level of, evolution.
I think she did. I don't know all the details of her bio, but what I've read is that she didn't take up practice until her early 30s, I believe. Um, and she worked with Yasutani Roshi and Kuroda Roshi and finally Maizumi Roshi, along with others along the way. But once she took it up, she really embraced it, and she did, in Zen, you're supposed to do all these retreats, all these sessions. And if you're in the monastery, these sessions come up once a month sometimes, or at the very least every 2 months. And they're usually, well, 1 month there'll be 3 days, and then the next month there'll be 5 or 7 days. So that was just part of the program. And once and she lived at the ZCLA at some point, and she just embraced that fully. And she was an attender of many, many sessions. And I think that made a difference in her and speeded her along the way, if you will. Such that Maizumi Roshi recognized something in her and gave her permission to teach.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, what's interesting probably about every religion, but it's certainly the case in Buddhism, is this concept of immersion.
Mm,
Yeah, and I think also the concept of consistency, meaning, you can't meditate twice a month.
that's right.
You could, but you may not get much out of it. The analogy I have is, I'm going to the gym next month because I want to get stronger. I'm going to go on the 17th. Yeah, it's like, okay, got it.
Yeah.
But the concept of immersion as well, which is, I think our minds are so habituated that you need some kind of immersion to really make a dent,
Yeah.
combined with the drop of the little water on a daily basis,
Right.
also over a long period of time to make a dent.
Yeah. Yeah, those two things are both very important. And I'm sad about the whole COVID episode for all of us, because among other things, it's cut down on retreats. You can do a Zen Zoom retreat, but it's not the same.
Right.
It's just not the same. There's something that happens when you're with a group of people, all of whom are suffering through this, the agony of the knees and the back and all of that, and losing sleep, et cetera, et cetera. Something comes from that doesn't quite work on Zoom. Now, having said that, I've never done a Zoom retreat, so I guess I should set one up maybe.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I think we're going to be in this situation
For a while, yeah.
forever. But yeah, we did one recently with Lama Lanang, and the only retreats I've done in person were karate related.
Mm,
Those were, I assume, well, they were super difficult, super painful, and pretty much around the clock.
right.
And this was not around the clock, but you definitely knew, because there was a schedule and because there were, 4 to 6 hours a day devoted towards it, you definitely knew you were on retreat.
Yeah.
It's different than in person for all the reasons you mentioned, but you definitely get, at least in this case, you definitely get value out of it, simply because you're putting in the time. There is a schedule, there is a teacher, you are looking at other people, so you're on the track, and it's better.
Yeah.
It's certainly better than not having it done. So
Yeah, someday maybe you can give me a sense of what a schedule looks like from your tradition. I could
sure.
borrow and use.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I went to. I can email you that. I went to one of your 1 day retreats.
Mhm.
I don't remember 3, 4 years ago, where we meditated. I want to say for a half hour,
Yep.
and then did that and then took a break, and then did that whatever 6, 7 times during the day.
Right.
And that's that immersion really shapes the mind. It's a little bit reminiscent to me of I can meditate up to an hour a day, typically, maybe a couple of times a day if I have the time. But on some days, if I don't have time, I might do 15, 20 minutes.
Right.
and there's getting in past that first 15, 20 minutes until you get into the half hour makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
15 or 20 minutes is better than zero. And I tell students, oh yeah, as long as you do it for 5 minutes, that's better than zero. And that's true.
Yeah.
But you don't really, the dust doesn't move away from the mirror so quickly in 15 minutes. You need,
Right.
depending on what's going on in your life, I feel that, you really need at least 20, 30 minutes, if not more, consistently to make, similar to the immersion. I'm not
Yeah.
suggesting a half hour is immersion, but what I am suggesting is putting in the time, whatever that means, is
Yeah.
critical.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I still, to this day, I try to get at least one sitting period a week that's longer than my normal 30 minutes, which I do once a day, twice a day, depending. Uh, uh, Once a week, I'll try to do 40 or 50 minutes.
Right. And big difference when I feel when I'm done, it's like, oh yeah, not that I'm supposed to judge. I'm going to have to delete this part of the podcast where I said I was judging my meditation. Okay. Um, but anyways, good. I'm glad we settled that.
Yeah, yeah, that's settled.
Made that clear. So the other thing that's interesting now that I'm, more in the Tibetan world is the huge emphasis on death and dying.
Mm,
And there was one High Lama, I read a quote from him, who urged his students from the moment they get up in the morning to say, death, death, death,
yeah,
death, death, death. I don't know how many times. And now that I'm getting older, and I'm very interested in the topic, more than interested, but the huge emphasis is so different than my time in the Zen world,
mm,
or the Japanese karate world, which is similar, which was it's now,
yeah,
about now, not, well, I am going to die, so I got to prepare for it. So it's coming at it from a different perspective. And I was wondering how you address that with your teaching or in your mind.
Well, I'm like you. I'm very interested in death, but I don't have a set of programmed beliefs or procedures that I can follow or explore. I mean, I'm aware of the Tibetan Book of the Dead and Dying, and other things. I read a lot of Tibetan lamas and teachers at one point, some years ago. And they were very impressive, and I very much was enamored with the idea of the Bardo state and using that to clarify your past life and get yourself ready for the next life. Um, and I also, somebody at one point said, that the Bardo is not only just about dying. The Bardo is every little, what I like to call every little in between moment. So I even have a little practice that I kind of designed where you focus on the in between moments, because as human beings, we tend to be oriented towards, well, I finished that. Now I'm looking forward to this. But what about that little in between place? What you've forgotten about that.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that's a kind of like a little immediate daily life Bardo. But I have very complicated ideas and notions and beliefs about death that I haven't fully resolved. So it would probably be very useful for me to explore them, and maybe
We could do that right now.
yeah, maybe you could.
I'm going to clear it up for you right now.
Thank you
Just
so much.
give you a sense of relief when this podcast is, but it won't be totally released until the podcast is published. That's how it works.
Okay,
So even though
gotcha.
you're hearing the words now, it doesn't click in for about 4 or 5 days. What I love. Well, I am working with Lama Lanang, and I don't know if I mentioned this in our phone call, to write a book called Tibetan Book of the Dead for Beginners.
Yeah,
I don't know if I mentioned that.
you did.
And
Yeah.
okay, so of course, as part of that, I have to do a lot of research from people that know a lot more than I know,
Mm,
and it's just so compelling. I look at things like, I don't know, did we talk about the University of Virginia and all the documentation? Okay, so there's a division at University of Virginia where they document all children who have a recollection of their previous life.
mm,
So, and I think for every 3 or 4 kids that they investigate, only one meets their criteria. The other 3, they go, that's just a story. So,
right.
2-year-old wakes up, has nightmares about dying in an aircraft or about getting shot in the head, or the 3-year-old wakes up and starts talking Japanese and no one in the family is from Japan, or whatever.
Right.
So they have documented like 2,500 of these. I want to say Dr. Jay Tucker is the head of the division of perceptual studies, but University of Virginia. And when I look at that and I watch the videos, it has a huge impact on me. So that's kind of part one. And then part two is I look at, okay, well, we obviously believe in karma, and karma goes from one moment to what's going to happen the next moment relies upon what's happening this moment,
Mm.
et cetera, et cetera. And that continuum, okay, and then I look at, when people die, there's so many stories of NDEs, near death experiences, where people could be dead for minutes, hours, days, and sometimes, like in Tibet, weeks. And then they come out of it and they can tell you, when I was dead, my heart wasn't beating, my brain was dead. I heard you guys and saw you guys talking in the operating room, and you
Yeah.
were talking about this, that, this, that, this, that. Meaning that the consciousness and the awareness that we have continues on
Hmm.
into the next lifetime. So, and what is that consciousness? The way I've heard it described is, well, those are our habits. Those are
Hmm.
our expectation lists,
Right.
the things we think we are. That ego, that's really what continues on, unless, of course, we can address it now.
Yeah.
So I look at all that, and to me, it's just so compelling and motivating to clean up my act
Yeah. Yeah.
before I die.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I like that. I like that kind of exploration. I'm aware of some of those studies that you reference, and they are very interesting and they're very compelling. And from a personal perspective, I had a what I would consider a little touch of something like that. I don't know for sure. I can't. There's no way to prove it. There's no way to to do anything about it other than to turn it into a story or a poem. Um, but my father also had he had open heart surgery, and he reported after the surgery, after he'd recovered, he said, I think something went on while I was on the table. I said, what? And he said, well, I just feel like I remember these two entities debating with each other, and one said no, he has to go back. The other said, no, he's done. Go back, done. And, the go back won somehow. Whether that was a weird little dream or what that was, I don't know. But, he was fully out, and his heart was open and his valve was being replaced and his heart had been stopped artificially. And, he was getting his veins and cleaned out and resectioned and et cetera, et cetera. So anyway,
Yeah.
that's on the side of something's going on here.
Something's happening,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Um, yeah. So the whole thing is fascinating to me, and the from a Tibetan Buddhist perspective, so many of the chants and the prayers and the practices are geared towards that.
right,
Now, it's not just about, okay, for the moment to make sure that you travel through the Bardo safely or you go to the Pure Land. I mean, those are great motivations.
right,
What's interesting is all the instructions have to do with this lifetime, right now, this moment. Because if I can lead my life appropriately now, more skillfully now, that's going to help me at that
right,
moment. So it's not just for that moment that we're practicing, it's for this moment.
right,
And because this moment benefits that moment, and et cetera, et cetera. And that's kind of how karma works. If I'm going to be a generous person on a regular basis, then I'm more likely to be generous tomorrow, the next day, the next day, the next day. Same thing here. So it's really a way to change those habits, those ingrained habits. Kind of goes back to Joko Beck.
Yeah.
and get that stuff off the list, or recognize it. It's not like we're taking stuff off the list. All we're doing in my mind is I'm just looking at it and going, that's that requirement.
Yeah.
Okay, oh, that's that one. And the more you do it, and we can also breathe into the stressful area that we're feeling while we're recognizing that. And then over time, those requirements start to soften and not grip us so much.
Yeah, the difference seems like between Tibetan Buddhism and Zen Buddhism in this regard around death is that everything I've heard from a teacher about death has usually been, well, one of two things. One, well, why not die now? In other words, you believe in a personal life, look at that, and why not, quote unquote, kill that personal life right here, right now? Because if you really look closely and immediately, you can't find a self. So, that not finding of a self is a kind of a death. So experience that now. And, you'll have, quote unquote, in Christian terms, eternal life, but they don't
Right.
have to use it that way quite. And also sometimes teachers of Zen will be a little bit flip about it. They'll say something like, when a student asks about, well, is there a life after death? And the teacher will say something like, well, I've never died. Why don't you talk to somebody who has? Of course, the implication is you can't find that person.
Right.
But then, the Tibetans are a little bit different about that. I'm thinking of the Dalai Lama. I'm remembering the story they tell about him when they were seeking him to be the replacement, and he was still a little boy.
Yeah.
He was presented with some physical objects
Right, to
that
test.
belonged to the previous, and he. I don't remember the details of the story. You probably do better. But in any event, he was able to distinguish between the objects that were, quote unquote, his in a former lifetime and those that weren't.
Yeah, there's a couple of good movies out. One is called Unmistaken Child.
Yeah.
About have you seen it?
I probably have.
Okay.
I'm terrible at remembering.
Yeah,
movies,
yeah. So it's about a lama who was tasked with finding the incarnation of his former teacher. And one of the tests that they give is they'll bring, let's say, 3 sets or 4 sets of mala beads. One of them belonged to the teacher. A vajra, a bell, all these different implements that were used by the teacher, together with 3 or 4 others that were not.
Yeah.
And they'll show it to the 3-year-old, the 2-year-old, the 4-year-old, and this is just one of the tests. And then if they can pick out all of their, and some children do not, and those are not the right ones until they find the one they can pick out. That was my, it's a lot of them, mine, mine, that's the real one, that kind of thing, or recognizes people, or knows where the monastery is, or things like that.
Yeah.
And hey, the Dalai Lama did it 14 times so far. And hopefully we'll have a 15th.
So is this all, would you say that this, your interests and the Tibetan interests in death and dying is in large part, how is it connected to the Bodhisattva ideal? So if we keep coming back and presumably we've reached a certain level of whatever you want to call it, accomplishment, although that's a tricky word, we're coming back not because we need to come back, but we're coming back because out of our desire to further along humanity, we would be fulfilling our implicit bodhisattva vow. Do the Tibetans talk about the bodhisattva a lot?
Yeah. So for most of us, we don't really have a choice. When we're in the bardo, look, we're living our lives with grasping now.
Right.
Grasping at the things that are on our list, things that we want or things that we don't want. All those requirements. We're grasping. We're graspers.
Yeah.
I'll speak for myself. I'm a grasper. Hopefully less every day, but nevertheless, that's what I am. And I'm grasping to keep that ego alive and support who I think I am.
Right.
So if I go into the bardo I still have that. The
Hmm.
bardo is really just a reflect. It's just the consciousness. The physical body's gone. We know that, but the bardo is just my consciousness that continues to exist
Mm.
in some way, shape, or form. So there's an awareness level. But
Right.
at some point, and the Tibetans say within 49 days, in some cases it can be instantaneous, in some days it could be longer, in some cases it could be years. In general, in 49 days, you're then, that grasping is so strong to come back into a physical body. That's how you are reborn into the womb.
Right.
And there's teachings on how you choose a mother and a father and that type of thing. Now, having said that, for those of us, I don't know if I'm one of us yet. I don't know if they're going to let me into that club. Uh, but for those of us that have
Well,
a
you're
certain,
definitely in the waiting room.
I'm, whether they like it or not, or they know it or not, I'm in the waiting room. Yes, there is more of a desire to come back because you can continue to help people.
Right.
And there's certain prayers or chants that we say along those lines. That is long, and the Dalai Lama says it, as long as space endures, I will come back to help dispel the misery.
Mm.
So and then there are people, and there's a training, POA. You mentioned it. I think you mentioned it, which literally means transference of consciousness,
Mm.
not transformation. Transformation is what we're working on now, but
Right.
transference of consciousness, which is you can transfer your consciousness. I don't know why I'm laughing because I practice it. You can transfer your consciousness to a higher being.
Mm.
And by doing that, you can rid yourself of all of this karma and go to Dewachen or the Pure Land.
Right.
And then you can stay there. So you
For a
don't,
while, presumably not forever.
it's above my pay grade. That's
Yeah.
for, that's for
Okay.
part two of the book.
Right.
Uh, and that's a question that I've asked Lama Lanang, and I've heard other students ask too. So it's not just me. There's
Yeah.
other people too. I say, we take these vows about helping other people, but then all of a sudden you have this opportunity to go to the Pure Land. It's like, well, what happened to all these people I'm supposed to be helping? And
I think it's a Club Med situation. I think it's temporary because
right,
there's
okay,
nothing
yeah,
permanent, including staying in the Pure Land, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know. And his answer, which I will not do justice, was along the lines of, we dedicate. There's a dedication. When we dedicate merit, I've done something. I make a donation, or I've helped someone, or I prepare an offering. I dedicate the merit to people who are suffering, or to various archetype Buddhas and deities,
Yeah.
and they take that very, very seriously. So by dedicating the merit and by doing all the practices to go to the Pure Land, that benefits sentient beings. And then there's apparently ways to benefit others in the Pure Land as well.
Mm.
So you now know everything that I know about that, by the way.
Well, I won't try to dig any deeper, but
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, don't push it, okay?
yeah, I like all of that. And I think probably as a result of my exposure to what I read in Tibetan Buddhism, I still do a practice of Tonglen periodically.
Right.
I still do some sort of notion of dedicating merit, specifically merit. I don't always think of it as merit, but just more of whatever health and well-being I'm feeling, may it also go to X, Y, and Z. That kind of projection, that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
I find that useful.
Yeah. And they take it, I hate to say it sounds stupid, they take it very seriously. They say that dedicating merit is the same thing as actually giving the money or helping someone. There's no difference.
Uh,
There is no difference in what we state in our mind. We think dreaming at night is an illusion. They go, no,
right.
no, no. There's no difference between that and daytime. Illusion is illusion. And the
Yeah.
same thing here. When you dedicate merit or you have an aspiration, there's no difference between that and actually doing it.
Right.
So I find that as a westernized, American, I look at that and I admire that, and that's what I aspire to, is uh, that kind of state of mind.
Yeah.
So when students come to you and they, well, actually a different direction. So what do you do for yourself if you find yourself, it's in the middle of the day and something, pissed you off, or, got you irritated, annoyed, or angry? Is there something that you do, and, any specific practice that you do to kind of,
Well,
get over
yeah.
that, get through that?
I think first of all, I try to fully recognize it. I try to recognize that this event or person or thing seems to have caused me to be pissed off, and I'm angry. But I also know enough that something got triggered. That it's not about them; it's about my trigger. Uh, but nonetheless, I think the recognition of it as a physical event in the body is important, and also in terms of whatever the track is, the tape that gets automatically activated. How dare he cut me off? I was, that was my right of way. That pops up, maybe, let's say, but immediately it's, oh, what's what am I feeling right now? Well, thumping heart and anxiety. Perhaps there was a little fear because it was dangerous what he just did, but just the sheer getting of it and the experiencing of it clears itself out. Not necessarily immediately, but these days for me, usually pretty quickly. I don't stew the way I used to years ago. That's one of the side benefits of practice, I would say.
What do you mean by that? I stew for a period of time. I never heard of that one. Jeez. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm with you 100%. I vary, which I think is good. It's good to have different tools. One
sure.
is I check my requirements list. The second thing is which requirement, because that kind of puts it in perspective for me, that it's
Right.
just some kind of made up expectation that's not being met. Second thing I do is I'll breathe, and I'll breathe in that area where I might feel the physical stress. It could
Yeah.
be the abdomen, it could be the heart, et cetera, et cetera. And then, and to me, the key is just breaking the habit.
Hmm.
Breaking the habit. What's the habit? The habit is getting triggered
Yeah.
and then stewing.
Right.
And so the sooner we can observe that and implement the technique, that just gets weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker until there's less stewing, no stewing, or you just look at the situation and go,
Yeah.
okay, no
Yeah.
big
Yeah.
deal.
With beginning students, especially, who often come with, this is not true for everybody, but let's say somebody comes who's pretty well bought into the whole conditioned life that we're given, and hasn't really explored the little gap that can happen between an event and our response to it. They're not even aware. It's like that: event, response. But practice little by little gives us a gap. But if they haven't done that yet, or they're in the process of doing it, sometimes I'll recommend something like, okay, so you really got upset, you really got angry about this thing that happened, and you didn't have time to take a look at it because you were in the middle of whatever you were doing. Uh, okay, next time you sit down on your meditation seat, just take the first few minutes after you've breathed or counted your breath or whatever, just to recreate the situation. Just literally try to recreate exactly what happened. I was driving down Center City driveway, and a guy came screaming across my front, and I started cursing at him. Just really recreate it, feel it, experience it, and then pay attention to what's going on in that recreated moment, as a way of starting to clear out the process and get to where you were talking about over time.
Got it. So that's a wonderful teaching, because
Yeah.
now I can't go back to what happened this morning or yesterday. but I can actually in my mind.
That's right.
And when we go back in our mind, I still feel my heart beating like
Sure.
it did in the car or whatever. So I can still practice it with real reaction, even though there's no car and I'm not in the car.
Right.
And then look to, oh, okay, what's going on here and address it and, you know, breathe or that kind of thing. Some people that I ask that question of teachers, and lots of different answers. And I don't ask that question for the value of the podcast. I'm asking that question for myself because I really
Right.
need more technique. I'm joking. I do need more techniques, but some people refer to more of an intellectual response
Mm.
in your mind to look at it. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's great.
Right.
I feel not only a need, but that to have real efficacy, that you have to include the body and the breathing.
Sure.
And that's because that's where the physical stress is being felt, or the heart, the physical heart is pounding, or the abdomen is pounding, or the head is, So the breathing connects the mind, which is what we're thinking and observing, and we're recognizing that there was a situation or whatever, and brings the body together in the same moment. At that moment, we are breaking the habit, and this is how we're addressing the issue at the same time.
Yep. Yeah, and then later on, or in addition to, you can bring in the conceptual stuff, such as, for example, what we were saying a minute ago, just that the anger and the response to the anger, that can be explored and thought about. In other words, is it absolutely the case that you have anger and then you have the response, or is there the possibility of a gap there? And if nobody's ever looked at that, then that's something to quote unquote literally think about and see if that makes sense.
Yeah, you
But yeah,
mentioned,
you're right. The most important thing is the experience, and the feeling and the thoughts.
but you're mentioning two gaps, which is interesting. I'd never really realized that until now. But of course, there's two gaps. One is the person honking the horn, and there's probably even more. I know in the Abhidharma or the Tibetans, they look at every moment,
Yeah,
the senses and all that. But I'm not that smart. So the horn honks, and then we react, anger,
right.
and then there is a gap between that initial feeling of anger and me yelling back at them or starting the mind going wherever it's got to go or getting the
Yeah,
heartbeat racing. So there's plenty of opportunity,
yeah,
seemingly small, but they ain't that small the more you meditate.
that's
And
right.
for that pause or that bardo in between these different events.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and you can do the same thing with visual space. You can play just the notion, and this helps break up the solidity of the so-called world as we know it. But you can, instead of looking at a tree, you can look at the space between that tree and the
Got
side
it.
of the house.
Right, 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 right. I
Yeah.
love that. Okay, that's what I'm doing this week. Uh, okay, so I don't know if I told you this, but Joko Beck was scheduled to be on the program together with us, but
That would be so good.
as you know, she's dead.
Yeah,
Um, but
whatever
if
that
you
is.
right, um, but if you had one question for her or one comment or one statement, I ask about who's your hero, and she's my hero, and I think she's probably your hero, one of our many heroes. So
Yeah, I don't know that I would ask her a question. If I did, it would be along the lines of, what's it like now? That would be a question, but I would just bow to her and thank her again, just for all of what she brought to all of us.
yeah, for sure. And she just keeps giving and giving. You emailed me a few weeks ago about a new book
Yep.
that her daughter, I think, is publishing, with Joko Beck's teaching. And I was like, wow, this
Yeah,
is
it's
great.
going
It
to come
does,
out. It's coming out through Shambhala, and it'll be. You can also already pre-order it, but
yeah, yeah,
it'll be out in late June.
yeah, yeah. So I look forward to
Yeah.
that. Anyways, thank you very much for taking the time out and giving me another teaching.
Yeah.
That's the whole purpose behind these podcasts, is just get more people to teach me. It's
Yeah,
about
well,
me.
listen, don't sell yourself short. You're also teaching us. I haven't really looked at your interviews. I accessed them, and I decided I don't want to see them until I'm done. So I don't want to be influenced
Right.
by, you
Well,
know.
none of them are as good as this one.
Oh well. But as I was saying, don't sell yourself short. You've given me some valuable stuff here, and rekindled my interest in things like death and dying and the
Right.
bardo and all of that.
Right. Well, just confirm whatever I said. Just confirm it somewhere else. Okay. Go to the internet, because if it's on the internet, then it's confirmed.
It's all there, isn't it? It's all there. Yeah.
Anyways, thank you very much. Good
Thank
to
you,
see you
Morty. I
again.
really appreciate it.
We will
Be
stay in
well.
touch. All right. Be well. Take care.
Yeah.
Bye bye. I hope you enjoyed our talk with Al Zolynas. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the It's Not What You Think podcast. That really helps us to continue to produce these episodes and invite other guests from around the world. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, or would like to hear any specific guests on the podcast, please share my email, mordylevine@gmail.com, or visit mordylevine.com. Remember, it's not what you think.